Hi, my name is Lorraine Morgan and I will today be sharing with you some of the key findings from my research study, which was about exploring client experiences of paid and unpaid counselling services in Wales. I hope you enjoy it. So why did I choose this topic and why does it matter? So there's been an increase in demand for counselling services in the UK as a whole and in Wales over the last few years. Numerous reasons for that, some to do with COVID, some to do with lower stigma, quite a lot of reasons, but it has led to overburdened services, public services and third sector services in particular, which the Welsh Government has recognised and has stated that may be overwhelmed in the next few years, in fact. So this has led to longer waiting times and a report of limited options for those accessing NHS and third sector free services for counselling. So this has resulted in quite a lot of people, those who can, turning to paid for private services for counselling. So why is this important? Because research is extremely limited into looking at the difference between the service you get as a paid for client and the services you get accessing non-paid for services. But the limited information we do have suggests that those who do pay will receive more choice and control, and these are things that lead to better therapeutic outcomes. So why does this matter? So it matters because a number of commentators are starting to point to the possible emergence of a two-tier mental health system in the UK, in which effective counselling is available only for those who can pay. Now this raises some serious ethical and societal concerns and is something that we need to be on top of and be looking at. And this is particularly true at the moment with the cost of living crisis. We're looking at almost half of Welsh households having no money for anything but the basics, and more than half cutting back on essentials even. So people have not got the disposable income to be spending on counselling. So before we move on to looking at the study in detail, it's worth having a look at what makes effective counselling and some of the barriers to accessing effective counselling. So we know that counselling is generally effective at improving quality of life, but that it's generally similarly effective amongst different techniques, different theories and different delivery methods. So we need to be looking at some different factors that may impact. Some of those factors that have been identified are client engagement, clients' expectations, waiting times and the therapeutic relationship. So they're the things that we're going to be looking at and focusing on. Some of the barriers that have been identified are cost and knowledge. So cost of the service and knowledge about how to find the service and what it all involves. There are a number of barriers to accessing counselling services. However, they're the two that come up in most studies, and they're the ones that we're going to be focusing on. So what we do know is that those with lower socioeconomic status, so those with less income, generally face more of these types of barriers, the cost and the knowledge barriers, and that's something that we're going to be looking at. So a little bit more background on what can influence outcomes in counselling. So we do know that accommodating client preferences has been shown to improve therapeutic outcomes. So clients being able to tailor services to get their preferred counselling method, delivery, things like that, that can help. So we know that waiting for treatment can negatively impact client outcomes. So what we know is that there can be a power in being a paying client. So being a customer of services gives a power that accessing free services does not, and power dynamics in counselling is an issue that can affect the therapeutic relationship and therefore outcomes. And we do suspect that private counselling services may offer benefits such as low waiting times, choice and control, and other things that can positively influence counselling outcomes. However, we know that that is not accessible or an option for everyone. So why are we concentrating specifically on Wales in this study? Okay, so access to publicly funded mental health services varies by nation in the UK. So we in Wales have quite a different system for accessing publicly funded health services than they do, for example, in England, who have what's called an IAPT service. What we're finding is that the current UK narrative on counselling is very England-centric. If you look at some of the websites of the regulators, there's a lot about IAPT and improving that. So as devolution continues and as our health systems do continue to be and increase to be more and more diverse, it's really important that we can have a picture of what's happening in Wales, whether services are meeting our needs, and if not, why not, and what needs to be done specifically for us here in Wales about that. So the study itself. What we were looking to compare was the experiences of people living in Wales who have used counselling services over the past 5 years. So participants had to be 18 or over, living in Wales, and have used counselling services in the last 5 years. No other inclusion or exclusion criteria applied. So we posted an online questionnaire. And we put this on various social media sites, and people were invited to answer the questions and to tell us about their experiences. So we asked them to report on the most recent experiences of counselling, as some people have had more than one experience. So we then analysed the data by separating the participants into two groups. So the ones who had paid for counselling and the ones who had not paid for counselling. So we then compared various factors within those two groups to establish if there was any relationship between payment for services and the other dependent factors that we're going to be looking at. So the dependent factors that we concentrated on were knowledge, choice and control, and satisfaction with the services. So what were we focusing on and what did we expect we might find? So our hypotheses were as follows. So we thought that participants who paid for counselling would probably experience lower waiting times, more sessions, more choice and control, more information, and have higher levels of satisfaction than participants who had not paid for their counselling sessions. So the interesting bit, what did we actually find from our participants? What we found initially was that there was a significant association between paying for counselling and the amount of times participants waited. So the majority of participants in the paid group waited around 2 to 4 weeks for their first session to see a counsellor, with 89% waiting less than 4 weeks, and no one waited more than 12 weeks who paid for the counselling. However, the majority of those who did not pay waited more than 16 weeks for their first session. Only 25% were seen in under 4 weeks, and 59% waited more than 8 weeks. So as you can see, there was a significant difference, and those who paid for their counselling sessions had a much lower wait overall than those who did not. Okay, so we found that the clients in the paid for group did have significantly more knowledge about the counsellor's qualifications, as you can see from this graph, but they also had significantly more knowledge about the type of therapy they were receiving. We found that 54% of those who did not pay for counselling didn't know what type of therapy that they were receiving, and this was only 11% in the paid for group. So, as hypothesised, we did find that participants who did pay for their counselling were more likely to have been able to choose the type of therapy that they received, and also the way that was delivered, so whether this was by telephone or in person or whatever. So we also found that there seemed to be a lot more choice and a wider range of delivery methods available to those who pay, things like walk and talk therapy, which wasn't available to any of the participants who did not pay. There are more information and graphs, because this was quite a wide area that we looked at, and they're all available in the handout for you to look at should you want to. So moving on to number of sessions. So this is an interesting one, I think, because what the data showed was that there was no significant association between payment and how many sessions you get. So in both groups, the average length of sessions was 6 to 10 sessions. So that was both the paid for and the non-paid for groups seem to be having similar amounts of sessions. However, the data did show a significant association, a significantly higher level of satisfaction from the people who paid for their counselling as to the number of sessions they received. So those who paid were much more satisfied with the number of sessions received. So what this indicates is that possibly it's not actually the number of sessions itself, but the choice and control over when those sessions are stopped and how they're stopped. So this was backed up by the data that 67% of participants in the not paid group had to stop due to rules of the organisation, not due to their own choice, in contrast to only 4% of those in the paid group. So appointment times. So as we hypothesised, we did find that people who paid for their counselling were significantly more able to choose appointment times that were convenient for themselves and were much more satisfied with the scheduling of their appointment times than those who did not pay. So it probably won't surprise you, given what we've just discussed, to find out that those who paid for counselling were overall much more satisfied with the service that they received than those who did not. So just a quick review of the hypotheses in relation to what we've just discussed and what we found from the data. So participants who paid for counselling, we did find experienced significantly lower waiting times, significantly more choice and control, and significantly more information, as well as higher levels of satisfaction than those who did not pay for their counselling. We did find that there was no significant difference in the amount of sessions accessed, the number of sessions, but there was a high level of satisfaction. So what are the implications? What does all this mean? I think one of the big factors that's come out of this is to back up some of the research that already exists, that it's not necessarily the number of sessions or the type of therapy or anything specific like that, but more the client's choice and control over those things that really makes a difference to their satisfaction levels and then the therapeutic outcomes as well. So we've also added further weight to the theory that there is a two-tier system of counselling developing in the UK, particularly in Wales in this study, and we're looking at a future of maybe a service that is now only fit for those who can pay. Looking at the fact that Wales doesn't seem to be any different from the other places in the UK, and we need to address this. Both the counselling profession, ourselves, and the Welsh Government need to take this seriously and really look at what we're doing about this. So the recommendations coming out of this study, I think the big one is that we need to make sure that all services prioritise giving clients choice and control and tailoring that service really to what the client needs and what the client wants at that time. We know this improves outcomes and client satisfaction. Also, in relation to knowledge, the not paid services should be looking at improving the amount of information that they're giving to clients, which should support satisfaction and outcomes as well. Waiting times, we know that a long waiting time can be a barrier to good outcomes in counselling, and that the current target of 58 days from referral to being seen by a counsellor is a long time, so that's probably about 2 months to be seen, and that's really looking like it's too long. It also doesn't apply to all services, so commissioned third sector services. So we need to be looking at the Welsh Government guidance around waiting times as well. That's going to be important. So we know that clients really value flexibility, being able to fit in around their appointment times around their commitments. We know that people with lower socioeconomic status tend to have less flexibility because they tend to have more caring responsibilities, job responsibilities, less disposable time, less disposable income. So it's super important that we start looking at making non-paid for services more flexible, more evening and weekend appointments, things like that. And really importantly, we need to start looking at there being paid employment opportunities for counsellors within the NHS, primary care and third sector. Increasing capacity in those services is a big priority of the government in all their literature at the moment, and yet paid opportunities for counsellors in those services remains incredibly limited. So that's something that we need to be looking at and maybe campaigning for as a profession. There are some campaigns around this, and I'll put links to them into the handouts as well. So thank you for listening, and I hope that's been interesting and for you. So yeah, brilliant. Take care and have a look at the handouts if you're interested. Feel free to get in touch. Bye bye.